Hi and welcome everyone to this webinar on running global virtual design sprints. My name is Amelia Åström and I'm an Enterprise Transformation Manager at Mural, and I will be your host for today's webinar. So if design sprints work well with everyone in the same room, could that same success also be achieved in a virtual environment? And how might we empower design sprint practitioners to make the transition from in-person sprints to remote ones? These are a couple of the questions we're going to discuss in today's webinar, so I'm super excited to introduce today's guest, Robert Skrobe. Robert is the founder of Dallas Design Sprints, an agency specializing in consulting design teams on efficient process. But he also coaches graduates on professional development and teaches design sprint process to Fortune 1000 companies. Robert and I first met actually when he was using Mural with his previous job, but I'm happy to be able to collaborate with him still today since he's now part of our consultant network.
How far I've gone since that time.
Yes, definitely you have. So exciting to see the development. And also, so last November, we basically teamed up with Robert to run the first ever global remote design sprint that brought together practitioners, thought leaders, and design sprint enthusiasts from all over the world. Robert actually did most of the work. He organized and facilitated the sprint. We were mostly just providing him with the tools and some support as well. But it was really exciting to see how the event allowed everyone to practice and apply design sprint methodologies in a virtual environment, actually solving a broad variety of real challenges and ideas. So in this webinar, Robert is going to show you how you and your team can run your own remote design sprint using Mural, and he'll also share the story of how the first ever global virtual design sprint came about. And we'll also talk a little bit about their plans for the next sprint in April. And before I hand it over to Robert, I'm just going to say a couple of more things. After that, you will not have to hear me talking so much more throughout the webinar. But I just wanted to mention that we're going to use the chat for discussions throughout the webinar. So feel free to locate the chat right now. You can look in the control panel of the webinar software for a little speech bubble icon. And so feel free to say hi in the chat and send us your location. And if you have a question, I would like to recommend you to use the Q&A section. In the Q&A section, you can also review questions that people already added and upvote them. So you can let us know which questions you're more curious to hear us talk more about. And of course, we're also recording this webinar, so we're going to share the recording with everyone afterwards. And that was everything from me. Now it's over to you, Robert. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you very much, Amelia. And thanks for everyone that's on the call right now and looking at the presentation. Appreciate you taking the time out to view this. And hopefully for those of you that are viewing later on, everyone finds this beneficial, and I'm more than happy to provide value and answer questions where I can. So let's get right into this. We'll start off with, oh, by the way, let's kind of do an overview. So if you're looking at the entire presentation, we're going to start off with the history behind how this entire endeavor got started, what we're doing in April, a little bit of like prepared Q&A based on the registrations that we received. And then finally, the latter part is going to be how you can set up your own virtual sprint in the same fashion that I did, giving considerations to the different things that you'll be encountering on your own. So let's get started with the pilot. Oop, I went a little bit too far. So yeah, we are at the pilot. Back last year around, I'd say September, October, I was starting to set up Dallas Design Sprints, and I was very active in the design sprint community. I was an AJ and Smart Masterclass graduate. And by the way, for those of you who are out there in AJ and Smart, how you doing? And I noticed a theme starting to pop up with a lot of the graduates, and also from people that I knew from Design Sprint Academy, people that were getting their online certifications with Design Sprints. There was this question going around. It's like, okay, now that I have the formal training, what do I do with it? For some that were in enterprise environments or businesses that did design sprints, it was just a no-brainer. You just kind of took what you learned and kind of moved forward with it and applied it in a fashion that seemed appropriate. But for others, it was kind of like, well, I don't have any practical experience with this. I have the certification. I'm really enthusiastic. I'm really excited to get started. But how do I do that? So I thought, well, okay, maybe I could help here. Is there a way potentially, even though I can't go out to other countries and I'm only in Dallas-Fort Worth, could I set up something virtually where people could practice the design sprint process and actually get some real applied experience to it and promote their professional brand at the same time? So I was kind of, I messaged the different boards that I had subscribed to. I asked a few friends, kind of got some information and thought, you know what? Let's give this a shot. Let's just experiment and see what happens. But I did have only 30 days to get it done. So I had to take stock of what I was good with first. I'm the type of person that loves to arrange things, that loves to analyze things, but I also have a really keen drive of discipline to get things done. I knew that if I had a lot of different variables involved with this design sprint, this virtual design sprint, I can handle it very well. What I was not good at was strategy. I usually have to rely on other people to see the long-term plans of whatever I'm doing. So right off the bat, I had to figure out what I could handle and what I had to outsource literally and ask people for help. Started with an open call for submittals after that in figuring out what kind of ideas, concepts, challenges people were interested in, then see who wanted to get involved at number 3 with kind of the volunteers and seeing what kind of people would really be willing to do the work outside of their dependencies, like other things that they had signed up for or that they were on the hook for, whether it was design work or their own families, offline considerations, kind of seeing where we could play here. Prepare everyone that did sign up for the scheduled events, give them all the documentation they needed, slide decks, kind of prepare them for what was to come, and frame it in a 4-day virtual design sprint. So this is, in other words, for those who don't know about this process, it's usually called Design Sprint 2.0 rather than 5 days you work at 4. And then when people engage this, go, okay, but make sure that at the end of this, you promote what you've done. You make this part of something you put on your portfolio in LinkedIn, in Medium, really tell the story of what the experience was like, not only for my benefit, but for others, so that you can showcase what you can do and do effectively. And that was a really key driver for me, is promoting professional brands of the people that were involved. So originally I thought it was going to be, okay, 5, 6 people probably that could carve out some time, maybe one team, possibly 2. But as the numbers started to come in, I started to realize that this was a little bit bigger than what I thought. And what it ended up being at its apex was about 60 plus professionals and 7 different teams from all over the globe. Now, my challenge was basically to link them up by time zone, by challenge, by their professional outlook on what they wanted to get done, and really be able to graft and organize teams in a way that made this thing work. The interesting thing about this event is that it expanded to involve charities and startups. One in particular was based out of Austin, and I hope I get this right. This was for disaster recovery or disaster relief responses, where somebody who was affected by a natural disaster could reach out through their mobile phone or an app to let people know if they were okay, or if there was something that emergency crews around the area needed to know about. And the funny thing was, with that particular endeavor, it lasted well beyond the week that we had worked on. But needless to say, it turned out way better than I had thought. And I got this feeling after it was done that there was something really here that I can move forward with, that I could really consider, like, well, if I wanted to do this again, what it would be like. Now, it is worth noting that one of the things that was critical in the success of this happening was using some sort of software product that everyone could rally around to kind of put different artifacts and documents and other things that are native to the design sprint process within the same space. And what really seemed to work with Mural is that for a lot of the major together, like online together activities, this worked perfectly. So the examples here are making a map and figuring out where your target is, posting solution sketches, scanning them out and kind of putting them here for everyone to see and comment on. One particular team decided to do mood boards, where they took a lot of visual inspiration from other examples and put them in this space. Storyboards, user interviews, even the prototypes. People that would work in Figma or Marvel or Sketch would take what they had done offline on their own, and then when everyone came together to discuss where the possibilities were, would put them in Mural and figure out which one makes sense for the leader of the group, which one they want to decide to move forward with. So Mural really helped kind of take what normally was done in a physical environment with the design sprint process and elevate it into the digital realm. And ironically, I thought that it was going to be more difficult than it was. And it turned out that a lot of people just naturally started understanding through the visual interface how to get things done, how to make it work. If they had questions, they would speak up. But for the most part, everyone, worked at, got it done fairly well. So the end of December, beginning of January, I thought, all right, if I'm going to do this again, I just can't do it 1 week, because a lot of people were saying I didn't have time for it. I had other commitments. I really wanted to come. I've heard from other people this is great. So I thought, what would be kind of crazy insane, but also very intriguing and interesting to do? So I thought, for next time, let's make this an entire month of design sprints, not just one, but opening it up so that you had an entire month devoted to different types of sprints depending on the process. So you had the original sprint book, AJ and Smart's 4-day design sprint. You have Design Sprint Academy's spin on doing the same 4-day but doing with problem framing. One of the books by Richard Banfield on the design sprint process had a lot of variety. Doing all those processes, mixing it with different approaches to doing design sprints that have been catching fire lately, such as growth hacking or working with charities. We had a lot of interest on the design and development side with working with NGOs and providing them with an outlet to test their ideas in this type of environment where they're virtual, and a lot of different professionals can come together for what they wanted to do. So opening it up in this fashion in various aspects, it's another experiment, a grand experiment, but on the solid thesis that it does have merit and it can be done at scale. Now, I needed to kind of work off of a plan in the beginning of January and at a high level really get this all together. So what you're seeing here is basically where I started, which was having early discussions with organizations and businesses to gauge their interest, get super early signups to see if the November pilot wasn't just a fluke and there was actually some merit to it. And then going into February, doing some lightning decision jams online to generate some ideas and challenges, creating Facebook and Slack groups to make sure there was communication. Again, what I had spoke about before about self-awareness, about arranging, organizing, analyzing data. This all plays into all the strengths that I mentioned before, and this is something I knew how to do. And at this point right now, we're doing signups and making sure that we're aligning them with challenges and getting the teams together. I will be worth mentioning for this Global Virtual Design Sprint in April, the deadline for signing up is going to be this Friday, end of day. So depending on your time zone, it could be 24 hours or it could be 48. But once we get everything done in March, we're going to be executing not only on the sprint, but hopefully for those Game of Thrones fans, I think that's also when the season finale is going to be starting. So we're going to have 2 things to look forward to in that month. I'll give you kind of a taste of the challenges that are coming up. These are 4 that have been somewhat popular according to the analytics. Being able to choose the right challenge, a service for women at night coming out from the airport. They want a safe drive and they just don't want to do an Uber driver. There's the idea that there could be a service for that. There is a real computer development program for refugees in Kampala, Uganda, that one designer is very, very keen on getting involved with and attracting others to do so. And Second Sight initiative for those that are visually impaired, and being able to have the home let them know where they are and where they're located, and kind of exploring this idea. But overall, there's 15 of these. So we have plenty of variety for people to choose from. And this is what we're endeavoring to do, is for April, not only have a full month of design sprints, but really give people the opportunity to A, get involved in the challenge with, B, showcase what they can do professionally, and C, do a particular version of the design sprint that speaks to them, whether it's problem framing, even a lightning decision gem if they want to do something short and they don't have a lot of time. This platform or this event is going to allow them to do that. So at this point, we're at the first Q&A mark. And what I did is I looked through all the registrations that you had sent in, and there were about 1,400 of them. And yes, that sounds a little crazy. But what I wanted to do was to pre-answer some of the ones that were in the registration so they didn't get lost. And these were 5 in particular that I pointed out that I felt like I could answer and give some value to. So Amelia, I'm going to kind of go through these somewhat at a high level pretty fast. And then would you want to open it up for Q&A, or would you want to continue on with the presentation? All right, so let's go ahead and get going with the first one, which is how do you keep people focused in a design sprint while remote? Because there's so many distractions that come up. One of the things that helped with me well, it is true. There's the sprint team. Usually you can get distracted, but if the sprint team is focused on outcomes and you properly framed both the online together and the offline alone activities and processes, you're usually halfway there. You can also outline the ground rules about a week before the sprint to help reinforce the norms you want everyone to hold themselves to. You want to be careful to avoid the illusion of control with virtual sprints. I see this every so often. It's like, how can I control the narrative, or how can I control the team? You have to kind of change your mindset instead and have faith that those who are taking part in your sprint are going to be professional about their conduct by aligning with those norms that you set out from the very beginning. As a default, you can have your decider or stakeholder establish their authority early and give some oversight to the sprint team to make sure that everyone is focused. So that helps to communicate accountability with everyone who is involved. It's a tricky balance, but if you can get those things right with the norms and with having a resounding voice that gives direction, that really helps things. The next question is, are there specific design sprint templates that can help with facilitation? Definitely. There are several free templates online to help out. I would start by visiting the Google Design Sprint Kit. You'll probably find a majority of what you need there. They're updating that fairly regularly. So if there is something related to templates that you're looking for in design sprints, that's a good place to start. I've also created a few myself in Mural, including some high-level alignment resources in Google Sheets, Docs, and presentations. We'll get into that later. I've also modified a Trello board to keep track of prototyping activities, like a Kanban board to kind of see where the tasks are. If you're interested in any of these, feel free to make sure that you put that in chat or reach out to me direct after the webinar. I'd be more than happy to help out. The next one is, how long does it take some members of the team who may not be digitally savvy to get comfortable with the tool? It really depends on the person. On one end of the spectrum, you have people who want nothing to do with anything virtual or remote, and that's fair. That's totally fine. They usually value face-to-face communication and collaboration above all else, and I get that. For everyone else, you have some options you can run with. One way I've experienced that speeds up adoption is an hour-long design jam with everyone using Mural at the same time. This is outside of the actual sprint. You can get some work done and learn how to leverage the software for image imports, post-it scans, timers, voting, and other features. And by that, those are all things that you can find in Mural. And you can pair it with like a lunch and learn. If you have some sort of event, something that involves food, that usually works fairly well, as long as you keep the drinks away from the computer, because I have had somebody kind of spilling their water on their keyboard and it kind of ruined the whole thing. But needless to say, if you can combine an event with a design jam and really leverage Mural in a virtual environment, that really moves the conversation forward. If most people are in the same room with one or two remote, how do you integrate them without negatively affecting the energy? That's an excellent question, and I get that a lot. So the first step is to get everyone on their own screen and dial-in. If you have one camera plus a global screen for the room with a speakerphone as the dial-in, more often than not, it's not going to work. Everyone who's remote to that room is going to feel even more so when the side conversations start happening with people that are physically in the room. Now, not only do those people forget the call that's going on, but you tend to forget whoever's remote as well, and you even feel more remote than you are. Instead, each person should engage online no matter if they are side by side or remote. If you equal the playing field with everyone's undivided attention, you mimic a proper working environment for those that aren't in physical proximity. Now, the second step beyond having everyone's own screen and own dial-in is to over-communicate. Never, ever assume that everyone on the design sprint team, whether they're local or remote, knows what's coming up next throughout the day. Make sure you keep everyone on the same page. Take plenty of breaks and measure and inquire on the vibe of the team. In fact, I'll do a plug for Dana Vatan. She just wrote a great article on LinkedIn on group dynamics and using a template called an emotional roller coaster. It's perfect for getting a temperature check on the design sprint team when you need it. And that article also features a link to a Mural board that has all the different phases of the design sprint and how different people can react to it. So it's a really great resource to have. And finally, what makes a virtual design sprint fail? Well, there's the same things that make an in-person design sprint fall apart for the most part. You have lack of participation, an ill-defined challenge or idea, weak facilitation, lack of preparation, lack of subject matter experts or exposure to them, lack of executive support of the effort, maybe even poor user testing, which is one of those Achilles heels that never gets talked about, and or a prototype that really isn't real enough. I mean, out of all of those, lack of participation in any dimension is usually the thing that sinks design sprints efforts. But for the most part, there really is no difference. I would say if you wanted even a more direct answer for virtual sprints and why they fail, sometimes it's just people can't get online for whatever reason. Somebody clipped a fiber connection in the neighborhood and they just can't do it. Sometimes you can't circumvent that even with a phone connection. So, but the general answer is that virtual design sprints fail probably as much as the real ones do, in meaning like in person. I don't find there's much of a difference. It's just the technology leverages a lot of the communication, and you have to make sure that you have the same kind of focus and perspective on virtual sprints that you would do with physical sprints. So that's all for the first Q&A. Amelia, are you there? I tried to reach out to you the first time. I don't know if you're still there.
She's frozen right now, but
okay.
We're going to try to get her back in.
It's the Mural logo. Hi, Mural logo. How are you? Okay, so we'll keep going. All right, so we're going to get into how you can do this too, how I set it up and how I'm setting up now, and how you can do this for your own team or for your own person. The caveat being that your situation and the variables that you're going to deal with are going to be different. So what I'm going to be prescribing or telling here may not exactly work for you, but what you should do is just basically take what makes sense and for your situation and just make it work, or at least take the value from what you find in this and apply it for what you're dealing with. So the first thing, and this usually goes with design sprints in person as well, is logistics and planning. Now, this is typically what I tend to do when I approach any design sprint, virtual or regular, but specifically for virtual sprints, I have to do a little bit more logistics and planning just because I have to assume that with all the distractions that my participants are going to be coming up against, whether it's email or social media or phone call from home or even their work, I have to make a commitment to over communicate, like I mentioned before. So you start out with a sprint brief overview to give everyone on the same page that you'll also use for, say, pitches at the beginning of every day of the sprint to make sure everyone's aligned on what they're doing and what the outcome is. Presentation decks for every day of the sprint, which I cannot underemphasize that this is super important. You really want to make sure that these are solid so that no matter when people preview the decks or when people are going to be using them on their own to kind of catch up, these are absolutely essential to make sure that people are on the same page about what they're supposed to be doing. Participant prep lists. This is really good for people that are remote, especially if they're trying to figure out what's the bare minimum they need from a technology standpoint, what they need for computers, webcams, microphones, how to communicate and what software to use. All of that is really essential to kind of get people up to speed. Sign up forms for sprints, if you're doing them on a public level like I am, where I tend to skew towards Typeform. It has a lot of integrations that I enjoy, especially with going into Google Sheets and porting all the information over there, signing up people for an email newsletter if they want updates and so on, especially, and redirecting them to other digital properties to basically continue the communication. And then team orientation. This can take a lot of different forms depending on your preferences. I tend to skew email, but now with this virtual sprint that I'm doing in April, I'm populating information in Facebook and in Slack and in email. And also I have an open calendar, which I'll get into in a second, that allows for people to do one-on-ones with me in case they really want to really get succinct around what they want to do with a virtual sprint and where they want to take things. So after logistics and planning, we go into coordination and communication. Now, this top part here is going to largely depend on whether or not you do have business outcomes involved with your sprint. This may or may not apply, but it's really good, and this goes into problem framing, to take the sprint brief and figure out if there are business outcomes related to it, that you really get that top of mind and discuss that right from the get. because if you don't have a really good alignment with the people that you're representing with the sprint, this can fall apart in a hurry through the process. So make sure there's alignment with that, as well as stakeholders and SMEs in the same regard, especially if you need their time for those subject matter interviews early, and if you record them. By the way, one thing I do recommend for subject matter experts, I know that the original sprint process kind of wants to bring them live and into the room. I found it's much easier if you record those subject matter expert interviews so that everyone that is working off different time zones can view them on their own time. And it also helps if those SME interviews are in doubles. So then it's not just a one-on-one interview, but the subject matter experts are two people that are part of the same domain, because the interplay and the conversations that happen with both of them really inform the problem space in a much more eloquent way and a much more enriching way than it would be if you're just talking to a single person with one point of view. You definitely want to get gateways and deadlines for everyone involved so people know when things are going to get done. This involves just the high-level view as well as the sprint itself. I would recommend not getting too granular here. Some people want to time box things down to the 5-minute mark, and I've seen these whiteboards that are really involved. Virtual sprints, even more so than physical sprints, are subject to change, even more so after Monday. It's really good if you keep these pretty much open-ended, but make sure that you have some sort of timeline so that it's proposed with the idea that it may change given circumstances that come up. An open calendar is really good for communication, and I've leveraged it for the previous event and this one. Having it open for people to schedule a half an hour, 15 minutes, an hour of time to really make sure that any knowledge gaps they have about either the process, the event, or what the outcome is, or what they get out of it, or even their role is detrimental to making sure that their involvement stays, they stay involved throughout the virtual design sprint. And then regular updates, depending on how you want to kind of go about it. On the execution side of things, the way to read this particular planet, so to speak, this blue planet, is you want to start at the upper left-hand side and work your way clockwise in terms of severity of involvement. So most of the time, when for the virtual sprints, you'll just have to help out with facilitation, or you may help for a particular process or activity where people are stuck or they're not quite sure what to do. You can pop into a call, you can join a Slack channel, whatever. You can usually help things out, and then the facilitator that's in charge can kind of move things forward. If the team is really focused on the problem, you become invaluable if you can help the researchers find testers and SMEs to help the team kind of get informed and also to test their prototype. More often than not, this is something that's thought of as like, oh, I can just get, on Tuesday we can start recruiting. And not really if you want quality folks to join. You want to probably start the week previous, but this is something that you could have some sight into to help out. Aligning design and dev. This typically happens in the sprint naturally, but sometimes you're called on to do so. Everything under execution tends to be more of your time. It's more high touch, high activity information where you're supporting the sprint team and you're being on call. You're putting out fires in case there's a shouting match online, which does happen sometimes with different people. And then sometimes with this virtual sprint, I'm signing up to be available 24/7. Not that I'm going to necessarily respond at 3 in the morning right away, but with this particular event in April, yeah, I'm going to try to be available when I can, because when it comes to accountability, I'm taking it all on. I'm coming into this with the assumption that if something happens that doesn't work out, then it's going to be in some ways my fault. And I've got to own up to that for this particular event. So that's something I'm adopting. May not be what you do, but in terms of your situation. But I've always found that having a level of accountability in this section on execution really helps to encourage people to continue on the virtual sprint and have faith in what they're doing is going to work out for them. And then finally, and this is probably the most important out of the 4, is sharing and learning your experiences. We did a lot of retrospectives with the different teams, and I'll zoom in here so you can kind of see this a bit. This was an actual Zoom call where everyone was kind of up at the same time, and this is me at around midnight. Not looking too dapper, but thank goodness this image is much smaller, so you can't figure that out. The retrospectives were essential for me to understand how the pilot was going to work for April. It also helped for some of the sprints that continued on past that week in terms of what worked very well and what they needed to improve on for the sprint prototype they had just done. a number of participants last time told their sprint stories online. Sadia Ali, in particular, we had some issues with her in terms of technical connections with Zoom and being able to work different default kinds of software. But most of the stories that are in here really illustrate how people took to this process and what they learned by working with different individuals on different sides of the globe. And finally, and I can't emphasize this enough, the main reason why I'm even doing this in the first place is not to promote my brand in terms of Dallas Design Sprints, or even to put myself on a pedestal, which is not even remotely, no pun intended, my intent. It's really to elevate the professional brand of everyone you're seeing here and really giving them the opportunity to showcase what they can do, network with other professionals around the globe to basically get perspective, learn from them, and show and get some experience from their perspective on what works and what doesn't, like how you measure up as a designer, how effective you are as a facilitator. And I've found that some of the relationships that have gone on because of the pilot have endured to this day. For example, I know that Abel and Brian are two people that worked on the same design sprint in November. They still collaborate, even though one's in the Philippines and the other one's in Hong Kong. Just recently, Sabrina Gorlich, who, if you don't know who that person is, you're going to find out in a hurry because she's really active in the design sprint space. Her and Amir Arab have been collaborating on a lot of what Amir's doing in Istanbul with the meetups that he's been doing, where he's been kind of showcasing all about the design sprint process and Webflow. I mean, it was funny because Amir had the distinction of working on 2 design sprints at the same time for the pilot. He worked on one over in the States side, I believe, or in the European side, and he also did one native over in another area. Again, it's what drove me in the first place to do this, and it's what's driving me to do this in April, is the possibility that different people can get together around a problem, go through that experience, collaborate and learn from one another, and really have somebody that can speak to their abilities and showcase what they can do. And I'm hoping that with this April event that's coming up, that's going to repeat itself. So no matter if you are in Boston, Massachusetts, and you're a researcher, or you're in Berlin and you have a background in marketing, but you're getting into design sprints and you're new to it, I'd like to think that the April event is going to be able to provide that platform for everyone to learn about the design sprint process, to collaborate and network effectively, and really promote the professional brand that they have, so that it's going to be great to learn what they learn and also to see what they come up with. So that's it for the presentation, I believe, and we're at the second Q&A. I did have some themes I put up here just in case people are wanting to figure out what kind of questions to ask. These came from the registration process as well, such as learning best practices, different scenarios for virtual sprints, winning support for doing virtual sprints at work. And I think we already answered this, so I won't go into that too much. But yeah, if you have questions, go into Zoom and go ahead and put those into the Q&A. We'll field as many of those as possible. And again, I'd like to really thank everyone for coming to the webinar. Hopefully this is worth your time. But if I missed anything, or if I didn't cover something that you really want answered, then please do put something in the Q&A and I'd be more than happy to fill it out. Well, not fill it out, but to answer it.
Thank you so much, Robert. Can you hear me well now?
You are now live.
Perfect.
Emil.
Thank you. I'm finally back. I'm so sorry that I disappeared for a little while. My Zoom software froze and I had to restart it to be able to get online again.
And that's the reason why I restarted my computer even before this started, because I knew that I wanted to avoid that. Because if I went offline, this whole thing would have been like, oh no. So, yes. But I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you're back.
I'm glad I'm back too. So I'm looking forward to go through some of the questions here as well. I wanted to start with one question about facilitation because we got a couple of similar ones. So basically we have one question from Jennifer here. The pilot participants were people who wanted to lead sprints. Is that correct? And not necessarily the typical participants who have had less human-centered design or design sprint exposure. Have you tried that yet virtually? So were it the same participants that were facilitating the sprints as well, or did you facilitate all the different sprint groups?
I'll tell you this much. If I had facilitated all those sprint groups, I would have died because that's just too many to do, like 6 or 7 sprints in 1 week. Oh my goodness. I wouldn't have died. I probably would have, like, when I've slept, I probably would have slept under the desk and probably did a Elon Musk kind of thing. No, what we did when we registered everyone for that event is we had people self-affirm what role they would ideally want to do. And we didn't necessarily just say choose one. We said, okay, out of everything you could be, a facilitator, an advisor, developer, designer, researcher, or something else, how would you best want to engage this particular sprint? So in terms of like the overall mapping of things, we had a handful of people that wanted to facilitate, others that wanted to definitely design. We had core researchers. There was one I had shown before, Richard, who was a researcher at AT&T, not really into facilitation as much, but was really good at research, and provided that particular sprint team he was on with some perspective on the types of users they were going to recruit. So to answer your question, no, it was wide and varied. Some people wanted to facilitate. Others were much more interested in either dev or design or even just advising, where they didn't want to do a lot of work, but wanted to get perspective on how the design sprint could go.
So did you have any specific process on how you recruited people for the sprint? Did you have any requirements or?
You mean to participate in the sprint itself, the design sprint for the pilot?
Yeah, how did you go about recruiting people?
So I leveraged the AJ and Smart Masterclass and the Innovation Hackers groups. I also did a couple of inquiries on LinkedIn. I just did a general call for Facebook, though personally most people won't know what a design sprint is, so I didn't get much play there. And I think I went to a couple of other Slack groups I'm involved with. I didn't do much local kind of recruitment or meetup because I was fairly well networked in the design sprint community here in DFW to know who could stretch and who couldn't. But I remember that for the design sprint meetup that I had established last year, I did put an inquiry out to see if anybody was interested. So between those 6 or 7 different digital and real footprints, that was how I had gotten a number of people to get involved with the pilot.
Great. We also had a couple of questions regarding in-person and virtual participation. Did you have any teams that were working together in person, in a local location, or were everyone just participating remote?
Everyone was pretty much participating remote for the pilot. I don't know of anyone that was sitting in the same space for the pilot one. I think everyone was purposefully on their own screen and kind of participating in a group individually. For the April event, that's going to change. There are groups that are going to be in the same room, and there will be some that are virtual. And like I mentioned in the previous question, it's going to be up to the facilitator and the organizer to make sure that everyone is individual on the same screen so that it's an equal playing field for those that are remote.
Sounds good. And while talking about virtual sprints versus in-person sprints, we had another question here regarding the differences between these two. That's something that we saw appearing quite a lot in the questions people submitted before the webinar as well. Mm-hmm. So we have one question that we got in here just a couple of minutes ago in particular from Zach, actually. Thanks for this question.
Hello,
so
Zach.
So you mentioned that virtual design sprints fail as much as in-person sprints. Does this mean that there is no effective difference between decentralized or virtual sprints and in-person sprints? Are there any challenges or problems or verticals that are better suited for vertical sprints?
I'm hesitant to say it depends as a general answer to the question for virtual sprints. Some of the main advantages basically is that for those who are enthusiasts of deep work, there's more of an opportunity to do that when you don't have the distractions of like your physical environment to kind of pull you in different directions. Obviously, if you're in your home office, there's still those trappings, but there's less so. There's more time devoted to a virtual sprint where you don't have to do a 45 or an hour-long commute to the office to actually get the sprint done. You don't have to venture off into different areas to kind of, meet in one space to kind of do the physical sprint. I found that the together online versus working alone time is much more succinct, so that when you're getting together, really the sprint itself for collaborating ends up being anywhere from 3 to 4 hours on Monday and probably a little bit less on Tuesday, if you're talking about the 4-day sprint. And then a lot of it can be done offline. So literally you could spend 3 to 4 hours together in an online space, and then everything else can be done offline or working within Slack or emailing, and people can still get on a call and collaborate if they need to. It's totally up to the group. But I found that's the major advantage, is that if you eliminate some of the physical trappings of in-person sprints and assume that the mechanics of doing the method are going to be the same in both virtual and physical, those are the benefits I see. Plus the fact that you can leverage the talent that's on the other side of the world for what you want to do with a sprint is appealing. And I will say this, I'll make this declaration, and this is just like a thesis I have, and hopefully I think I'm going to be historically correct. Virtual design sprints are the future. I mean, pretty much that's where this whole thing is headed. There are remote people, there are teams that are working remotely right now. They're doing design sprints. It showed up in the registration. I totally get why people want to do physical in-person sprints, and I'm perfectly fine with those myself, but it's going virtual. It's eventually going there, especially if you're going to be leveraging the kind of talent you can find in different cities. At least that's where I think it's headed. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. While talking about challenges of remote sprints as well, or remote versus in-person sprints, one of the bigger challenges while running remote sprints is that you have people participating over different time zones. Mm-hmm. Do you have any tips for how to manage that in a good way?
It's just like collaborating. So it's very much like collaborating with a safe. Okay, let me reset. I was about to go in 3 different directions and my mouth wouldn't do it. If you think of any enterprise organization that's global, typically you're going to be working with teams in Buenos Aires or in Krakow or in on the other side of the world from the States. So typically, especially in agile environments, you have handoffs of teams. Like if you're in, I remember when I was at Fidelity, we had a team in Ireland that we would collaborate with on the dev side to make sure that whatever work they had done there was going to be handed off to the agile team over in on the States side here in Dallas. And it's the exact same thing with sprints. Now, the caveat being is that depending on when that overlap happens, you have to figure out if 2 to 3 hours is going to work for your team or if you need more time, and which side of the pond is going to make that sacrifice. It becomes part negotiation, part collaboration. A lot of times that the things that do help is being able to either work late at night or early in the morning, but really it comes down to scheduling at its base. But for the most part, the real challenge is just the Monday and Tuesday where most of the sacrifice is made. But then after that, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, a lot of that can be done offline. For the testing itself, sometimes you'll test in one time zone and another time you'll test in another time zone. If there's no localization of the product that you're testing, it really depends on the situation. But more often than not, you can find at the very worst probably 2 or 3 hours where there's transfer where you can make those virtual design sprints work for distributed teams.
Great, thank you. And another thing that I think is related to this as well. I remember I sneaked in a little bit on the November sprint last year, and you did a presentation with some tips and best practices on how to run remote design sprints. And one thing that I especially remember that you talked about was how to facilitate remote collaboration. You can leverage individual work and group work. Do you have any tips on how to apply that in a design sprint? How do you keep people engaged between those individual downtime, thinking time, and the group work?
You know, it was funny, before we started this webinar, I saw that same document on like my crib notes for that. And I thought that would be really good to reference, because I think Amelia's probably going to ask me a question about best practices and I'm going to have to reference that. So it's tricky for me because I'm going to answer the question and it may be totally different than what I put back then, but it's just, I'll do my best with this.
You always learn new things, so you keep evolving on what you have.
There you go. Yes. Always improve or try to. I'd say that it comes down to having a proper structure for the activities that people are going to be engaging with. So much like the pilot and with April, and probably it's going to be a little bit different in April. So in the pilot, I had a proposed schedule that I had sent out to the team on when they were going to be working together versus when they were going to be working on their own, when they needed to be working as a group versus when they needed to ideate on their own and come back later on to showcase what they had been working on. Some teams took that template and went in two different directions. One said, no, we need more time to be with each other. So they expanded the online time to 5 or 6. And for people that originally said they didn't have the time, they made the time. Just, it was their own personal choice. Others who were very much about efficiency and kind of hacking the design sprint process said, I bet you I can do that in 2 hours. And the team agreed, so they cut down the online together time to even less so than that and did everything through Slack and collaborated that way. But originally in the pilot, I had a template out, and something I recommend is that you have a high-level schedule of when certain activities are going to be done together versus when they're going to be done alone. Now, for the April event, when I assemble the teams, I'm doing a little bit of a different thing where I'm asking people their schedules for the week that they've signed up for. Meaning like, okay, you have the challenge, you have this week, you have this team, but what realistically is your availability? And based on that, we're going to frame the type of process we're going to be kind of putting in place to achieve the outcomes and the challenge that they've signed up for, and not do it in reverse. So again, there'll still be that negotiation of what the proper schedule is, but I usually have something in hand to say, here's what I think would be an optimal way of going about your design sprint, and then let the teams self-dictate on which way they want to go.
Cool. And that kind of ties into a question that I've seen in many variations through the submission forms and also the Q&A here. How do you use Mural to facilitate the sprints, and do you have any templates that you share with participants? I know that we did some pre-cooking as you do in the cooking shows. We actually have a couple of murals ready to show briefly.
Is that the time to showcase our cooking?
Yes. So maybe this
Okay.
is the time to showcase the preparation we did beforehand.
Okay, so I'm gonna exit full screen here. Whoa, there's the chat. I was wondering where that chat went to. Okay, so if everyone, you can still see my screen, right, Amelia?
Yes, we can see the screen. So if you switch to a different tab, we're gonna follow you over there too.
Got it. So this is an example of a basic template we used for the pilot. And for each day, generally for the Together online activities, I set up the things that would typically happen on a Monday, the long-term goal exercise and sprint questions, and some examples to kind of move forward with, and gave them a couple of sticky notes to work with from there. The make a map exercise was down here after they had gotten done with everything here, and it kind of followed along. So there's ask the experts. Should I just do a Southern accent whenever I screw up? Day 2 is here with the solution sketches, the storyboarding. And I stopped at day 2 for the pilot just because I had a feeling that the teams would kind of dictate the direction they would go in after these 2 structured days. It was hit or miss, but this is an example of in Mural, the template that we had used, or that I created and gave to everyone to basically use on their own. Now, people went in different directions with this depending on how confident they were about their design sprint process. And this is one team's kind of example of where they went with things. So they did the long-term goal exercise, sprint questions, started using the drawing tool that's native in Mural to kind of circle particular things that were the sprint questions and the long-term goal, kind of outline that within Mural itself, go up to the Ask the Experts and the lightning demos, and they kind of populate everything here. Concept sketches went in this space, and as you can see, they start kind of incorporating in Mural as they start to learn and understand the program, what makes sense to them and how they want to go about doing the work. Storyboarding, mood board exercises, and again, this is part of the main presentation, and I'm waiting for this all to refresh, but this shows prototyping and everything, including the user interview templates, putting in notes as people heard what people were saying, all the people that they had interviewed for the different for the different for the prototypes they were testing. And then there was a retrospective here. It was taken out and put into a different mural. But this is basically kind of an example of one team that took a basic template that I had outlined here, and I'll showcase how big this is, and basically made it their own and adopted it, and literally did the entire design sprint process while working within Mural. Same thing with the LDJs that we did to generate the challenges that I had listed before. Here's the base template. Start off at the very beginning of the first step with generating some ideas at a free-for-all, categorizing them, doing some affinity diagramming, voting, figuring out what kind of sprint team is ideal for this challenge and the outcomes, and then effort impact scale to figure out where things go. And here's an example of the first free-for-all we did. People followed along, started organizing things, affinity diagram, got the challenges out. And then what was interesting was how people self-affirmed what they wanted to get involved with for the challenge. And this is a good way of starting out and understanding, if this is going to be a challenge in April, what's your interest? And what was really interesting to see how people self-affirmed this particular challenge and getting them involved with that one right there. And it makes it easier for me when I'm organizing these teams to figure out where people wanted to sit. So that's kind of a before and after. Here's the blank one where we started that and gave it to the event and say, run with it. And here's how the LDJ kind of worked out on the Mural side. And by the way, I think maybe Amelia is a good time to kind of showcase the virtual design sprint site that kind of culminated all those challenges into one. If you go here, that basically explains everything what we're about. And the ideas are in this section where I had kind of shown it in the presentation. You can sign up for particular challenges right from this page. And again, it scrolls all the way down. There's 15 different challenges to choose from. So pretty much you can select one or many. You don't have to be restricted to one. But each one, based on those LDJs I showed, has subject matter experts that people think would be ideal for this particular challenge, what the suggested sprint team is, the potential outcomes. All of these are suggestions for people that sign up for this, but it's really up to the team to dictate which way they want to go with things.
Great, thank you.
No
there's still a lot of people online, actually. I'm really happy to see we have really good engagement today.
Hey, as long as I'm providing value and I'm not boring them to death, then we can keep on going with this. I'm good.
Cool. I have an interesting question here from Matthew that has been upvoted by 2 people too. So I think I'm going to go with this one next.
Okay.
How do you create an emotional safety net remotely? Do you have any tricks to make people bond on an emotional level?
I try to seek that out from the perspective of me first, meaning that I want them to feel like I've got their back, and then I'm not just throwing this out there and saying, okay, do a sprint. Especially for the facilitators. There were a couple that were very green, that were very learned. They had their certification, but they were scared to death of making a mistake and really needed some hand-holding. That's no problem because I recognize that. It's like anyone trying to ride a bike for the first time. But it's that accountability thing. I made sure that the facilitators felt like they had a genuine 100% backing and support from me from the start. And then as the team came together, the kickoff was a really good measure of who was going to kind of come together and have a little bit of empathy, have a little bit of understanding, figure out their team, kind of put their best foot forward with it, that it was worth their time. The kickoff before the sprint even happened was a good measure of that. And then it's really just being available, checking in with the team, seeing what's going on. The kind of questions that come from the team are a really good indication if there's bonding going on, if the collaboration and communication is starting to gel a bit after Monday. Usually Monday is a really good test to see if the team's doing well. But on the emotional side or the bonding side of things, if you do the kickoff right and you do it effectively and you monitor what happens on the Monday with the team and assist where you need to, you start to see that bonding happen on Tuesdays more often than not, especially when you start getting into the designs and getting perspective. Usually the concern becomes much less around that time.
Great, thank you. And we also had a couple of questions around how to sell sprints to your team. On one hand, if your organization never have done a sprint before, you have to sell them the whole day about doing a sprint. But in some teams, they might be some skeptics about doing a virtual sprint. So what would be your recommendations to introduce the idea to your team? Or maybe there are situations where you shouldn't even be doing a sprint.
So I have a lot of empathy for anyone that's really attempting this, because it is extremely difficult, especially in enterprise environments, to showcase this new way of going about things that at its face really is efficient and works really well. And trying to, I wouldn't say convince, but really trying to communicate the benefits of this to a lot of people that are very much about either the established process or going about doing things. Selling sprints can come in different flavors depending on who you talk to. So on the executive level, and for people that have like the power of the purse, or people that have some importance, or are major decision makers, you have to frame the conversation in terms of what the outcome is and what how it can benefit them, understanding their pain points and their perspective. So one way of doing it is making, when you have the conversation, or you can just have a conversation about what's going on. If the opportunity arises where they're talking about process and how it's inefficient, they really need to meet deadlines. That's something where you can go, well, you know what? I think I can get you your deadlines and actually get the design work done in less than a week. And that's usually if you know you've got some attention there, they'll say, well, really, tell me more. That way you can start getting into the granular aspects a bit about the process, but sticking to outcomes and how it benefits your audience, whether it is on the executive side, it is a decision maker, or if you're just talking about your own team and trying to showcase how the design sprint methodology could work for them. It's less about doing a lunch and learn and showing the entire process, because it's one of those impressions that people will forget, and really showing by example, small things, doing things like the effort impact scale as a to-do list, and showing how you can organize your day effectively and getting the most important thing you have in your workday done. If you're on a design team, doing any of the Tuesday activities in the design sprint and doing some ideation around the 4-step sketch and the sticky decision, and showing how fast some concepts can be realized visually in that process. Those are some effective ways I've seen and experienced in the past to not only showcase the benefit of the process, but to, and especially with the second one, learn it yourself in a very effective manner by having it part of the natural process of getting work done at your workplace, and seeing who seems to be interested, who's kind of gravitating towards it, who wants to learn more, and just having conversations about how the process works. That tends to have more stickiness and more effective long-term application to what you do. And those are usually the two paths I recommend generally, without knowing any more details.
Great, thank you. We're going towards the end of the session, but I know that you mentioned that you have time to stay a little bit longer if you want to.
I absolutely do.
So maybe we could stay a couple of minutes more and just see if we can get through a couple of more questions. Otherwise, we're happy to follow up with people afterwards as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to answer questions even after this is done. If you forward them to me, I can put them in a format where I can answer them and kind of group them together. I can do some affinity diagramming on the questions.
Awesome.
And then do it that way. I could actually, hey, how about this? I could actually make a mural out of it, so that when this is all said and done, I can go back to some of the comments that were there. We can work through the top ones and then either re-invite people to the mural or make it part of the summary, whatever. We can work it out offline and figure it out.
Cool. Of course. We had a couple of questions. I just want to mention too, we're going to share the recording and the mural presentation and the templates as well afterwards. So you all know that you will get this afterwards. We had a couple of questions that were more related to the April sprints. I wanted to make sure we had time to address some of those as well. Okay. We had one question from Brad regarding time commitment. How much time should a participant expect to put into the April sprint if they participate?
It's really dependent on their schedule. So if someone registers and says, I'm available, say the first week of April, and when we form the team, they say, well, my time is limited to just maybe Thursday or Friday. I'd like to work as a researcher, but I have my dependencies with work and with my home life that I need to address. Now you multiply that by about 5 or 6, and when you cross-reference all those schedules together, we figure out what makes sense in terms of a process and in terms of times that people can reasonably work on this, so that I'm not asking too much of their time to basically make this work. But that's the plan, is that we figure out what challenge and which week or weeks that you may be available and want to do this. And then from there, figure out when your available schedule is and kind of work between those lines and try to get something together that makes sense.
Great, that sounds very reasonable. And another question that I saw coming up a couple of times was regarding what type of facilitation training or sprint introduction do you give to participants does the participants get before they start the sprint?
That's an excellent question, Amelia. I'm glad you asked that. So part of what I'm going to be endeavoring on, this is going to be starting next week, is I'm going to be starting a video series that basically explains two things. One is how a lot of what you saw here in the four general steps on getting a virtual sprint together, and kind of going through some of the basics around the design sprint process. And what this is meant to do is to provide support when I'm not there, and do it in a structured way so that I can not only go through typically what a facilitator or an organizer has to do to get ready for their sprint in April, but also designers, developers, architects, anyone else, and kind of give them the same kind of preparation. So it's less about them reading more so, but giving them another outlet to do that. And the video series is also going to be a way of fielding Q&A that comes up and posting those to Facebook, Slack, and other places, so that if there's an immediate way of getting some answers to their questions. So to answer the question, yes, I will be actually endeavoring on 3 weeks of video recording that will be posted in the channels related to the virtual design sprint, and giving people the ability to watch short 8 to 10 minute videos and getting them aligned with what they need to know, what do they need to prepare for, and how to prepare for the actual April event that's going to be coming up.
Great. We had a couple of questions from Frank here, actually sent us.
Hello, Frank.
Questions.
You got to start saying names, because otherwise I don't know. It's like, we have some questions that have come through and I don't know who they are.
Yeah, so some of them were coming from several people at the same time. So instead of mentioning it's a long list of names.
So I could say, like,
I tried to mash the questions together.
Kathy, David, Adam, thank you. Like they're all in different directions or something.
I will. Sometimes I lose them I get so many questions in the Q&A pin, so sometimes I kind of lose track of where the question was.
And since it's after time, we could do silly questions. I'm perfectly fine with those too. Okay. I'll try to answer them in a very professional manner.
Yeah, so for these design sprints, what roles are typically included in the sprint teams? What types of roles are you looking for?
So the default ones that typically fall into like a digital sprint, one that's online, not physical, is you have a facilitator. I always opt for 2 if I can get them, just because 2 facilitators can help each other. But that's I won't veer off topic, but definitely facilitator, designer, developer, and researcher. Those are the 4. Then after that, it becomes who would really inform the design sprint, and especially if it's, say, mobile development or it's voice design, getting somebody who may be a specialist in that. If it has to deal with like working with like, say, that the refugee program, like a sociologist, there's another one that could use a psychologist, someone who's basically versed in their field of expertise, and having them on the design sprint team. But really it's those 4, maybe a 5th. So let's say facilitator, advisor, developer, designer, and researcher would be the 5 that would be core to any design sprint team. Facilitator for sure, designer and developer as like the absolute if you need that, but typically it's 3 at the bare minimum, 5 is a good number, 7 is where you want to roam if you can get some specialists on the team.
I'm trying to find the exact question I wanted to ask now, so I can tell you the name of the person asked it.
We can make up a name too. I don't know if they can razz me later on if I get their name right. How about Sebastian? Let's see what Sebastian has to say.
Okay. So Sebastian is wondering about your experience running sprints with people who are experienced to running sprints and people who are totally new to running sprints. What are your recommendations in those situations?
For those two particular camps?
Yeah, I think it's probably more related to what are your recommendations to involve people who are not experienced at running sprints before? How do you get them up to speed quickly?
Oh, so for this particular event, it goes in different layers. So if you're brand new to it and you have a certification, or you don't have a certification and you're new to it, I'll try to pair them. Well, first, depending on what they have, I'll do the video series and the different articles, different resources, so they can be self-learned. If they opt not to do that, but would rather work in tandem with someone else, then if we have enough people, and so far we have 100+ signups, I'll pair them up with a facilitator that I know is a little bit more seasoned, so they can work with them, maybe do a couple of activities. In absence of that, if they really do need help beyond the video and the resources, then I'm available to come in and say, okay, what do you need to kind of discuss, or what should we talk about before you get started? Or do you need me to kind of sit in and help you with kind of going through the motions beyond what's in the presentation decks? It's kind of a measure of the individual and figuring out what they need to be comfortable for. And I've gone on full spectrum. I've gone for the person that's just like completely freaked out, all the way to the person at the other end, which is like, I got this. You don't need to worry about anything. So I've worked with both, and I'm anticipating that's going to happen again in April.
So how much of the process do you actually explain in person? Here's another question from Dan. The previous question was actually from Jennifer.
Oh, Jennifer. Sorry, I called you Sebastian, Jennifer. I'm sorry about that.
Yes. No, sorry, it's my fault. I should keep better track of all the questions, but there's so many coming in, so it's kind of overwhelming. So Dan is wondering, how much of the process do you explain in the sprint, and how much do you just link to different videos, books, or third-party resources?
I keep it fairly high level. I'm assuming that people will be, if they're really keen to know or need to know, that giving them some direction to go by, they'll take an hour or two to basically, learn more and come back with questions if they need to. The wonderful thing about the Slack channels is that if people are new to the sprint process, there'll be not only a general area, but there'll also be a section for their particular team. Or there's going to be there's another channel for questions for me, as well as process for Q&A that we're going to be setting up. So there'll be different outlets for them to kind of go, I have no idea how to start Monday. Should I start with a pitch? Should I do like a fun little thing where everyone shows their shoes? And they need that guidance. I think there'll be plenty of those outlets for people to kind of figure out not only about the design sprint process, but how to navigate their way through the April event. I'm keen on providing a lot of education for this event and not necessarily leaving caution to the wind. If I can put a lot of effort and time into giving those resources and guiding people along and seeing the benefit by seeing the success that they have, or that their confidence in kind of doing the sprint is just a little bit higher, then I'm going to feel good about that effort.
So we also got a couple of questions about facilitation courses and certificates. Which courses would you recommend for someone who would like to learn more about facilitating?
I'll caveat my answer by saying that you really should only go after certifications if you know this is something that you are going to move forward with in a meaningful way. There are courses that span there are some that are free, and there are some that are not prohibitively expensive, but they are investments of time and resources. And you really, especially on that end of the spectrum, you have to know, like I did, that this is a methodology that you're going to form a business around, or that you're going to be really moving forward with as something that you do professionally. Depending on your circumstance or your disposition, it really comes down to your preference to how supportive and involved you want and what kind of engagement you want. I will showcase what I've done, and then give other options that I'm aware of. So I am a graduate of AJ and Smart's Masterclass. And the reason why I went with that one personally is because I, at the time, had done 50, 60 design sprints. And what I was looking for was an organization that had been doing them full-time from the start, but really could hone my particular needs for getting the finer details around different methods of eliciting information, process, the paperwork that they used, just a contrast from what my experience was. But also they had a really vibrant and involved community around the design sprint process, and they contributed to it a lot. I've been consuming their videos for a while, and I had kind of a runway with them, so that was my choice. And at the time, I got in on the early bird pricing that they had, and I was an early advocate and an early adopter. So that's the choice that I made. There's also Design Sprint Academy. There is, I mean, there's 2 or 3 other ones, but there's like, and in fact, I wrote an article about it, and I almost wish I would have had those in the crib notes. But there are at least, I think 4 or 5 that are especially good at giving you a comprehensive education on the process and what to do with it and how to leverage it. But my choice is AJ and Smart. There's a few others. John Viton's Design Sprint Academy is really good. But I would definitely do your homework before you decide to make an investment of any type in this, and really be certain that it's something that you want to do. I would never recommend certification unless you've actually done a design sprint and done 2 or 3 of them to really get an idea of where you're going with it. Just getting the certification alone is great if you want to have that as like something you want to list in your LinkedIn, but you definitely want to have the experience to back it up.
Great, thanks to you for that advice. So we're a couple of minutes over. Do you want to keep going, or should we wrap it up?
I'm good.
And some more follow-ups.
I'm here as long as you need me. I'm good.
Great. We got a question in the chat here. You shouldn't post questions in the chat, but I'm going to answer this one anyway. It's from Rebecca.
We're being flexible here. It's fine.
Exactly.
We're after hours now. We're not on the clock per se.
Exactly. I thought this question was pretty interesting as well. So Rebecca is wondering if you can register your own team with 5 to 7 participants for the sprint in April.
Absolutely. And I will show you how it's done since we are actually in there. So if you were to go to the Virtual Design Sprint website, it's not clear when you first go there because I have just this big yellow button that screams sign up for it today. If you scroll down, there's a section in here that says register a sprint. And if you click on this, you're going to get a type form intro that says register your design sprint right here. And then we're already wondering what it is. And it goes into what you can expect out of the form. There's even a link here to discuss the event that you want to do if you want to reserve 60 minutes on my calendar. And like I said, this is the open calendar concept where it's going to showcase my entire calendar and where my availability is to talk to any teams that want to get a design sprint going for this event. So that's pretty much where you need to navigate on the site to figure it out. And let me close this so we're back here. That's how you do it.
Perfect. We had a couple of follow-up questions on the template or the mural that you showed. Mm-hmm. So Jennifer is wondering, which activities would you recommend to do as a full group, and which ones did you recommend to do alone as solo work?
On the virtual sprint, like the full boat we did for the pilot.
Yeah, and maybe on the other one as well, if you have any recommendations on that.
Sure. So get out of full screen again. Let's go back to the basic template. So everything, and maybe this is probably something I should have outlined. So the long-term goal exercise and the sprint questions are something you definitely do as a team, that you do together online. The make a map is also something you do online. Now, I will caveat that these 3 particular activities are going to depend on people's schedules, so they don't need to be done back to back. I attempted to do that with the pilot so that you didn't have to get together for an activity, then break, activity, then break. But between all of these 3, this is a good start to kind of get everybody together on the same page. Then the Ask the Experts was really dependent on whether or not the expert was live or if it was recorded. If it was recorded, then Ask the Experts and lightning demos more often than not were done offline so that people can basically respond to them, put all of their questions in, and then also put some examples to go by so that if they wanted to get back together in the afternoon on Monday, they could and kind of discuss the lightning demos, maybe do some affinity diagramming on the experts, what have you, and then have some basically have something to go forward with going into Tuesday. Now, one team in particular wanted to had a dearth of time on Monday, even more so than the rest of the week. So they opted to work offline for a while to get some dinner, and then the evening they actually went into the solution sketches and started crafting up some solution sketches. They brought to the evening hour after they had went through the lightning demos and saw what people were doing in real time and started doing solution sketches here. Now, this usually caveats that you do the process of the 4-step sketch and so on. So I'll roll that back. The solution sketch process, they got back together online and they did the 4-step sketch and the sticky decision here and produced the solution sketches offline in anticipation of Tuesday. So I apologize. It was a little bit of a mix-up. So to reiterate, they did start from the beginning. They did the long-term goal exercise, sprint questions, and make a map together. Went offline for Ask the Experts if they were recorded. Same with the lightning demos. Came back in the evening, did the lightning demos, and kind of saw what people had for inspiration. Did the 4-step sketch and the sticky decision ahead of time, and then did solution sketches offline in anticipation of day 2. So that, I apologize. I kind of mixed that up a bit, but that's an example of how online and offline worked with this. And then storyboarding was also done online depending on the schedule. And then for prototyping, the team basically took it from there in terms of how they wanted to schedule their prototyping and how they wanted to kind of factor that in. Hopefully that answered the question, Jennifer. If it's not, then put back in Q&A that I was rambling like a madman and I needed to clarify my statements.
Of course. Should we maybe take one last question and then we follow up the rest of the questions offline?
I'm totally fine. It's your call. So if you want to continue on with the questions and get them recorded and put them here, I'm more than happy to do so.
Cool. So this question seemed quite intriguing to me. It comes from Megan. She's wondering, what's the most common mistake you've seen made in virtual design sprints, and what would you like to change to improve that?
Boy, Megan, you hit me with a showstopper. The most, probably the top problem, or the top, how does she phrase it? The top problem that I see with virtual sprints? Was that it? I'll say it's a top one. Okay. The one that comes up the most is, and especially that this is just native to this particular event, is the drop-off, meaning that everyone is volunteer. So if there's something that pulls them in a different direction, it's Monday may have a full boat of people, but then Tuesday you suddenly have 3 people that are not there because of emergencies. In fact, we had one person that had a very severe event happen offline where they just couldn't make it for the rest of the week and they were out. So for these virtual design sprints that are open to the public, you're very much at the whim of circumstantial events that happen and potentially having design sprint teams narrowed down to like 2 or 3 people where you can't move forward. Outside of that, in a scenario, but if you're in something else where you're just working with a virtual team and you're in an actual company, the thing that usually trips people up the most is adhering to a schedule that's not flexible. So if people feel like they're kind of stuck in a schedule box and they have no way of negotiating out of it, there's this level of rejection that comes up where they don't feel like they have control over their own destiny, especially in a virtual environment. There's half a level of effort and they don't feel like they're part of the endeavor. It's really important, especially as a facilitator, to remain flexible in the midst of events that come up, especially with things that kind of pull people in different directions, but making sure that people remind them of the commitment that they've made, and making sure that the schedule that you have from a logistics standpoint is kind of there for people to change if they need to, but to try to stick to the gateway, the deadlines and the gateways that you set up from the very beginning.
Great, thank you for that insight. And here's another interesting question from Holly, who's wondering, how can you include users who are non-designers in design sprints to co-create solutions? Do you have any examples to share?
Wow, I have one example. In fact, but My example is probably a poor one because we had slated for one of the pilots in November for a decider to actually be part of the process. Actually, there were two. I take that back. So one could not make the times because of her dependencies at work, and that was understandable. But the other person, who was an author, and his name was Gustavo, he was really instrumental in giving not only focus to what the team was doing, but giving perspective on the problem in a way that really was meaningful. So it depends on if the user is someone of authority or if it's an end user, like a consumer that's going to be consuming the product itself. It really comes down to the nature of that person that's getting involved and how they contribute. So they're not just sitting and listening in on the call, but they're getting involved and learning about what the entire process is. And you also have to pick the right individual, because if you're just having them there as a representative of your customer base, they may or may not take to the process that everyone in the room is kind of on board with, and may feel either A, out of place, or B, feel like they're not bringing the value that you're seeking. So having them fill the right role before they get involved and how they're going to engage is probably really important to have. If you have that in place and you know how that end user is going to be engaged and utilized and valued, then I think you're in good shape. It's an easier way if the person that you're getting involved is in the decider realm or somebody of authority that really informs the team. Then it's an easier kind of integration. But from a consumer side of things, you really want to be careful in terms of the engagement to figure out what makes sense.
Thank you. So I'm starting to wonder how many of these attendees are actually listening and how many are multitasking and doing something else on the side.
Well, that's the whole thing, is that they have it in the background. They're off, they're probably gone to lunch. Some of them are just basically going, you know what, I need
Coffee,
to eat.
tea.
I get it. It's fine.
Yeah, I usually watch webinars during my lunch break anyways to have something to snack on at the same time.
Andrew Muirwood raised his hand. So that's the first notification I had, is somebody raising their hand. So,
there's still people here listening.
Matthew, Melvin, Tammy, Megan. Oh my goodness. No, there are people listening. Kate Mullen.
Yeah, definitely.
Jill Sensible.
Let's go on until half
James
past.
Wood. I don't want to say
well.
the names of seeing, because I'm gonna slaughter him. Chaim Hirsch. There's lots of them. Adam Stasiak. Oh, he raised his hand twice. Oh, he's got both hands in the air. There you go. Okay, what else we got?
Maybe we can go with
Seth Spearman, Kyle Gardner. I see you guys raising your hands still.
This one is interesting as well, from Matthew. I don't think I asked this one before. How do you keep creativity high without physical interactions or activities like drawing, writing, or crafting physical prototypes? How do you do that in a remote environment?
That's a great question, especially because I knew I was anticipating that physical question coming up. And I gotta, okay, I'll say two things. One is that I only have experience with one product, in a physical product working in a virtual environment. And the majority of the build was done locally by 3 people. And a lot of it was show and tell, more so than other people that were virtually getting involved, because they really couldn't. But what ended up, the dynamic of that team, and for reference, they were working with a 3D printer, and they were working out prototypes for medical devices, like holders, like customized holders for medical devices that normally weren't available, and that could be customized for different environments. So that was one example of a 3D printer that I've had, and that may not necessarily answer the question of creativity. But if you're talking about creative endeavors on a physical side, I mean, I can't really answer that question with any authority. I'm really sorry. I wish I could. I would love to learn from other people that have had experiences like that, especially if you want to showcase like how somebody knits very well, or like if you're trying to work out like a physical product that deals with how to knit more efficiently and how that's worked out in a virtual environment. I'd love to learn about it, but I don't want to answer that question half-assed, so to speak. I would much rather just caveat by saying I don't have enough experience to really answer it.
I can only speak from my own experience, but a couple of weeks ago, for example, we ran a sprint with another client with Moleskin, actually. So the idea was to experiment a little bit more on how to kind of combine the physical environment with the remote environment we're doing while doing a remote sprint. So all the participants were actually remote, but some of the sketching, like it is possible to sketch in Mural. Then there are a lot of tools that you can use to sketch in other browser applications, but it can be quite difficult sometimes. For sketching, I think it's usually best to use a smartphone or an iPad to get some more space to sketch. But otherwise, what can be done pretty easily is some of these activities can actually be done offline, and you can then take photos of it and share online. So that brings a little bit more of the physical flavor to it. But also what we found works, like one of the most important thing about keeping engagement high in creative activities, especially what I find working at least, is trying to give people the alone time so they get time to think by themselves first, and then they share it with the rest of the group. It can be ideating or sketching or something like that, and then just take the time to go through all the ideas with everyone, because I feel like that's something that really sparks the creativity in everyone.
Yeah, and another thing also is that if people are keen to it, and I just thought of this, and I don't know why I didn't think of it the first time, if you're open to live streaming yourself in terms of your creative process, especially when it comes to, if you work with paper and you like doing that and would rather have it live and showcase how you're kind of creating things. I've seen people fire up Facebook Live and just have their phone kind of propped up somewhere, and as they were kind of working through like a really involved illustration of like a physical product, kind of showcasing how they're thinking about things. It's recorded so they can go back and look at it if they need to, but literally it showcases how somebody works in real time. So it's insight into the working alone concept. But you can have chat on there if you want. If people ask questions about what they're doing, or if they want to inquire about something, then that's one avenue to do it.
Cool. Yeah, I think that using video calls and having everyone connected and actually share their camera, I think is probably the most important. I forgot to mention that before because it's something that it's so natural and so obvious, at least in our team, because we use it all the time. But I think that's one of the most important things to make, if you have especially remote and co-located people and you want to make everyone feel engaged and participating, having the video on is one of the most important things. It creates a lot of empathy for the rest of your team. So I think that's also very important. A lot of camera time, like we're doing right now.
Yeah, and it's especially funny sometimes, especially if people are first starting and getting assembled. Maybe the camera in the computer that you're working with is not at the right angle, so you're cut off. You're only seeing people like this, and then you just see their forehead and you can't see their mouth talking. So it's really interesting to see how people kind of assemble themselves on video. But yeah, it's really important to have that dynamic and for virtual environments, and not just have a person's name or their avatar when it comes to communicating and working online, especially in design sprints.
We have another cool question here from Adam about prototypes. When do you think it's enough with just a sketch prototype, and when do you think it's more important to have a more robust one to test?
It really comes down to the group and also to the individual and what you're comfortable with. As the example I'd shown here, people are more than happy to kind of just work with pencil and paper and take a screenshot on their phone and upload it into this environment to showcase what they're working on. They generally prefer it. More often than not, the pen and paper environment and kind of working in a digital environment to sketch things out is what people prefer. And then really Mural acts as a kind of a repository for all of these different endeavors. So people can work in their home office, like something like this. They can go into like a workroom, whatever floats their boat, or they can basically fire up something like an iPad with an Apple Pencil and just kind of go to town on some ideas they have. and upload those into Mural, and then you can just organize, shrink, and choose where things go. But all of those physical artifacts eventually become digital. Now, when you talk about the prototype itself, I try to make sure that, and this is just my own personal preference, that on the Wednesday morning that you're working, that's typically prototyping day in a 2.0 process, that you have the designer take the lead and take the storyboard that was worked out and really start going into the micro interactions and assigning a particular frame to an individual and having them work out how they would approach, like somebody selecting something in an interface, or how this interaction would work, and guiding them through that process, so that when a designer and developer gets it, it's less heavy lifting for them to really digitize the ideas that have come out in those physical environments. So I would skew towards being physical as much as you possibly can until you have to become digital. But when it goes to the digital side of things and the prototype, working in either a mobile or digital form through like a prototyping software, that the designer developer architect combo will have plenty of information to transfer what's done there in a physical environment into a digital one.
Cool. And we have two questions from Adam and Chris that I think we can also answer at the same
Adam
time.
And Chris. Okay.
So the first one is about maximum amount of people. How many people are too many for virtual sprints? Are any redundant roles? Does redundant roles pose an issue? And what is the maximum amount of time you should schedule with the group to meet? Like, can you schedule too much time?
Yeah, you can overdo it. So I try to, the sweet spot for me historically has been 6 to 7 people at most. If we go over 7, there's diminishing returns because there's just too much logistically to take care of. So I try to keep, that usually seems to be a really good area, like 5 at the minimum, 7 at the most. If there's more than that really want to get involved, then I create something called a bench, which are people that can slot in during the prototyping phase, or that can help out with subject matter expert interviews, or get involved on the ideation sessions only, so that you bring them in to really tackle the problem space in a meaningful way. So one example is we had an extended team of 12 people on the design sprint team. 6 of them were on the core team, but the other 6 were bench players. 3 got involved during the Tuesday sketch times, and then 3 more were added during the prototyping phase, especially on the dev side, to make sure that the prototype was as real as possible and was also working in a way that would eventually encourage its adoption. So leveraging a bench for extra people is definitely something I recommend. There was a second part of that question. I forget what it was, but that's the main thing. It's like, it was something about
how much time should you schedule for people when they work remotely?
Let's say you're blessed with the notion that everyone has an open calendar, which is rare, probably very rare, and you have the ability to schedule as much time as possible. I would still skew on being very conservative with people's time, because you want to afford them the luxury of dictating how their schedule is. So as a default for virtual sprints, I like 3 hours of together online time on Monday, 4 hours if I can get it on Tuesday, but usually it ends up being 3, and maybe a couple on Wednesday, and the rest is negotiable depending on when people are available, and really affording people the respect and time, the time that they need to not only engage meaningfully for the sprint, but take care of all the other stuff that they have to do offline.
Great, thank you for that recommendation. And I think it's starting to get time to wrap up now. I feel like I need to take a break and get up and move around.
Okay, so hey, I'm not gonna. This is not a marathon. I'm not gonna.
I imagine that you feel the same, and I guess that many of you guys online as well. So I wanted to do one last question at least. I've been saving this one for last. So
and by the way, before you ask the question, I think it would be one of those things where where people were raising their hand before. That could be kind of a nice little way of saying, okay, how many people want this to go on and extend? Or
yeah, we could do that. How many people want this to go on? We have
That's what are you doing? There we go. now, as I suggested, okay, there's like 7, 8, 9. See, it's funny because you don't know at this point, since it's like 35 minutes in, if they're really trolling you or if they're really interested. But I'm going to have faith that they're really interested and kind of go that route. So
they did a huge effort in trolling you otherwise. So I think that must be,
I know. I'm just going to say that people have the best of intentions, so that Kyle Gardner really does want to see a few more questions being answered, which is fine.
Yes.
Just going to go with that. And everybody else that raised their hand previously.
Yeah, so Kathy asked a very interesting question here, but what do you think is especially good using Mural for in a virtual sprint? Or why do you think Mural is good for using?
Why do I think Mural is especially good at it? It's the thing I found, or I like, the Mural as itself as an application is really good to kind of bring people together, as I've said. But one of the things I like doing are the voting mechanisms, especially for voting on which particular aspects, like if you're talking about which long-term goals are the best, which sprint questions are the best. Voting is a no-brainer, especially with the controls that you have. The included timer within Mural really helps to time box particular activities. You can use that in conjunction with Cuckoo, which is an online resource that you can use for teams that does the exact same thing. It's a Pomodoro online timer. It's just CUCKOO team, I think it is. And that is a way of getting an entire team together on the same timeline. Another thing is just the ability to like export a lot of what you can do in Mural and utilize it in an offline fashion. I've just found that people gravitate to Mural and use its tools in a way that kind of shortcut a lot of the inherent processes or to-dos within a design sprint. I know there's other options that people can use, and they're just as good. But since I have a history with Mural and I know the application pretty well, I skew towards it. But the little tools and little things that are within the application, and now with the outline tool and getting teams to kind of focus on a particular activity, I'm going to be using those for LDJs for sure to get people attention rather than clicking on my avatar and saying everyone follow me. That's another way of kind of getting everyone in the same space.
Yeah, definitely. I think using a tool like Mural, like there are obviously many other, I'm obviously biased because I'm working here, but
and I've been working with it for a long time too, so there's it's a big confirmation bias in the room here. But there are other options, and those are just as good.
But besides using a webcam, I would say giving everyone access to actually contribute their own ideas, be able to see their ideas up there, be able to interact with other people's ideas, being able to prioritize, move the sticky notes alone around. I think all of those are things that help increase the engagement by creating these almost like games that people can interact with throughout the session, so that they don't just participate in a more passive way, which is something that you can do very well with Mural.
That's right. Plus, it's really interesting to see how other people work in the same time that you do. The ability to see how people are kind of moving things around, the feeling that there's activity within the interface. It's typical of most whiteboarding applications, but I think Mural does it at scale where if you have 12 people in the room, it's frenzied and it looks really interesting. But that, generally speaking, to answer the question, the tools that are inherent within Mural make it easier to run design sprints online.
Cool. We have another question here about how to pitch the process, but I think we already talked about that earlier.
Yeah, it really comes down to, even before the pitch, having some meaningful conversations with the people that you want to influence or affect, and finding out from what's going to matter to them. What are their pain points? What are the problems they're trying to solve? You got to start there before you even go through the process. The process in itself isn't a silver bullet. Really, it's how you can help with the process is what's going to matter to your audience.
Cool. And how do you get everyone in the same context? Do you have any tips for that? This is a question from Francia, by the way.
I'm wondering what Francia means by context.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. That's one of the reasons I had to save it to last, because I couldn't answer it before. Okay. But I can imagine you have everyone on a remote call. How do you get everyone on the same page? Like, how do you?
It's in that theme of over communicating. So it's kind of, so here's how I do it. So let's say this is the kickoff meeting for a design sprint for April. I'll introduce who I am, and what my role is and what I'm here to do. Then I'm going to go through some of the highlights of the sprint brief, what the challenge is, what the team is there for, what the outcome is, and what we're hoping to get out of the time together that we have. And that the kickoff meeting is there so that we can make decisions on which direction we want to go in. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, no, field those. Okay, let's start with getting the logistics around the event settled, like so, and then we just go through all the different gates that are on the agenda. I think it really comes down to best practices with communicating. So having an agenda for the meeting, time boxing certain things, parking lots, certain items that are outside the context of the conversation, and really drilling down to group decision making. In terms of context within Mural, it's really about focus. So part of what we had just mentioned about tools is that usually have a bunch of icons at the bottom that correlate to all the people that are paying attention to what you're doing. If you just basically select someone and say, okay, follow me, you can give them context and move them around so that you can, whenever you're viewing and concentrating on, they can go ahead and they can see as well what you're focusing on. And then once you're done talking, typically people will start to do some sort of action.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. We had another question here about tag teaming. I'm not sure if maybe that's a sprint term. Can you speak to tag teaming with other peer facilitators and lightning talks?
Yes. All right. So I'm big on tag teaming, or basically having a partner for facilitation. I'm a huge advocate for this, and this can be 2 seasoned professionals, or it can be 2 junior professionals, or a senior or a junior. And here's the reason why. More often than not, you're going to run into a situation in any design sprint where you are either A, overwhelmed, B, being pulled in 6 different directions, or C, your conflict resolution abilities are going to come into not into question, but they're going to be put into the spotlight. I know that I tend to let things ride sometimes when it comes to teams kind of talking about particular problems, especially on Monday. And I worked with someone named Adrienne Guillory, who was an amazing user researcher, still is. I am a huge advocate of hers. And one thing she did better than anybody is not only was she able to organize and arrange the proper people that we were going to talk to, but she knew how to command the conversation in a room better than me or anyone else I've met. And by command, she meant giving direction, setting the tone, setting expectations, calling audibles on when to change things up against the schedule. She was a natural at it. And I learned so much from just being with her in terms of facilitating and learning how she did things that I adopted those some of her techniques when I do my own facilitation. And I think it's instrumental, especially with having a co-facilitator, for things like who's going to get lunch. Oh man, I ran out of like 8.5 by 11 paper. Rather than excuse yourself and lose the momentum of the group, your co-facilitator can say, I got this. Come out, go get what they need, and come back. Let's say that your car breaks down on a Monday before the sprint, but your co-facilitator's there. They can basically handle the first hour or 2 and do the best they can. But now you don't have to delay or even postpone the sprint because of you're having an issue or an emergency. And it's one of those things where it's a bonding experience too. You essentially like not only learn together, but you have this experience with them that kind of carries forward, where they can speak to your abilities to do things. They can vouch for you, especially when it comes to pitching design sprints to other people. I highly recommend it, and it's not talked often enough. So definitely pair with somebody that can help you out where you're weak or where you may need help, but definitely go with 2 facilitators for a design sprint if you can.
I think that's very important in remote or virtual sprints as well. Like as the challenges I got while my Zoom software was freezing at the beginning of the sprint, the webinar
and
today.
Look what happened. You had another facilitator right there to go, well, Amelia, do you have any questions? No. Okay, well, let's get going. And you were sitting there going, come on, restart. Restart.
My lovely colleague David was able to jump in and take some questions while I restarted my Zoom software. So especially with all the technical challenges, you can that can happen to you in remote.
That's another
sprint
important
testing.
point. Yep, that's right. Yep.
Exactly. We had another question here from Steven about prototypes.
Okay.
When testing the prototype, how do you approach recruiting users? For example, is it important that test participants reflect the geographic diversity of the sprint team, or is the recruitment based primarily on the user personas of the product or challenge?
I skew very heavily towards getting quality people or quality participants in your user interviews. This is why. And I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, that the user interview part of the design process is the Achilles heel that no one pays attention to. If you spend so much time producing a quality prototype that everyone thinks is fantastic, that the designer thinks it's really great, and so on, and you get people that, as participants, that are somewhat representative of your user base, or perhaps they're people that are fill-ins when the other ones, and they just want to get an impression, it is fertile ground for any detractors in what you're doing, or especially for people that see the design sprint process or see your prototype as something that's a problem. It gives them ammunition to say, look, you just threw this in front of 5 people just to get their opinions. How does this actually track to what's important for this business or this company? And that's happened more often than not. It's detrimental not to take the opinion that you're going to start on Tuesday and find the right people that you're looking for. Whether you're going from personas or you have a user archetype in mind based on your sprint brief, you want to, as early as possible, start securing time with the right people that you're going to be testing this proposed prototype with, and pay them to be there. It doesn't take much for some people to volunteer their time. Sometimes it's an easy $25 Amazon gift certificate. Sometimes, you know them and they're doing you a favor and they want to come by because they want to help you, whatever it may seem. But I highly recommend having some sort of compensation for someone being there to give their opinion on what you want them to see. Otherwise, there's really they have no stake in the game. If they're going to be there and you're paying for their time, they want to get you, and they're the right people, they're going to give you valuable opinions. But don't skimp on user research. No matter what, even if you're pinched for it, really try to find at least 3 people that are representative of the customer base you want to test for.
Great. No, I totally agree on that. We have one last question, actually.
I don't believe you.
It's actually true, but we went through almost more than 50 questions today, so that was pretty well done.
Okay. Well, this has been the last one, because if anyone saw what came up on the screen, I've got a podcast interview coming up. So yeah, this has to be the last one.
Okay. Yeah. So are you always following the sprint schedule by the book, or do you adapt to the challenge or concept goal? Do you have any tips when it comes to adaptation?
So this is a fantastic question to end with. So it's really going to depend on your familiarity with the design sprint process. I found that the more I know, the more I want to change it up a bit. And I only do that because I think that especially with considering 2.0 and 3.0 processes, if you take the base process and use that as the framework, then you just kind of mix and match depending on what you want your outcomes to be. And this is a theme that's happening more and more. It's happened a lot in 2018, and it's going to be in 2019, where the design sprint process is really looked at as a recipe of different activities that you can do, and retrofitting them against, say, something from McKinsey or something from IBM, and mixing and matching so that you get the outcomes that you think would be optimal for the stakeholders that you're working for, or even the prototype that you're trying to design. It's for anyone that's learning the design sprint process, you definitely want to start with just the baseline 5-day or 4-day process. And then from there, think of how you would want to try and experiment different ways of doing it that may elicit different information, maybe better outcomes. Maybe you have an idea around prototyping day that's much more efficient. Because of my interactions with so many facilitators and designers and developers, I've really changed the way I approach design sprints holistically, and it reflects in the April event. I'm trying out all sorts of different ways of going about how the design sprint process could work, because I think there's merit in adopting a point of view that the person has and how they can get to a better end result. So to answer the question, it'll depend on your experience, but start with the fundamentals. And then once you become more experienced and more seasoned and more learned about the process, then have at it. Experiment, read on sprint stories of how other people have done them. Some of the people that we highlighted here have written articles about brain sprints, about research sprints, brand sprints, all sorts of different recipes on how this is done. Really just mix and match and go for it and try out different things and write about it. Share what you do. I advocate this so much that I don't know. I mean, there was one person, I'm forgetting her name, but I came across her article online about how she approaches design sprints in terms of engagements and how those recipes differ. She didn't give any details, but it was a perfect example of, if you're doing marketing, then you have these recipes for design sprints. If you're doing branding, then there's these different recipes. If you are working on a physical product, then there are these possibilities. But really, we can't have that conversation unless people that experiment in this space really share what they do and get feedback. And for me, like that really lives and breathes this stuff, get some impressions about what it is. And I will write back and say, this is fascinating, tell me more, because I want to learn more and be able to share with other people that I know.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. Do we have any last questions before we end?
And again, they can be really crazy questions. We're getting close to time, so.
No, thank you so much, everyone, for your engagement and all the questions. It's been
very
really
much so
amazing to be able to shape the whole content based on your preferences. So really appreciate that. And
I really hope the answers I gave, especially if you look back at this recording later on, I really hope they were valuable and they answered they helped the people that asked the questions in the first place. So I really appreciate everyone submitting their point of view and their questions, and hopefully I provided some value. Yeah, let's take the advantage of having everyone here online and just get as much out of it as possible. So really appreciate. Absolutely. We're all here. We're all gathered in the same place. We're talking about design sprints, at least for a little bit. Let's make good use of our time. Exactly. Okay, but thank you so much, everyone who participated. Thank you, Robert, for holding this amazing presentation, for all the questions, all the resources. It's been really fun preparing this with you as well. It was fantastic. I had a great time. And don't forget, Friday, if you want to do a virtual sprint, there's my plug, my shameless plug at the end of the entire webinar. If you want to get involved, you got till Friday. And then after that, we're getting the teams together and we're rolling. So yes. And we'll share the link for the sign up with the follow-up as well. And I think I will probably do some reach out on social media as well to remind everyone about that. So yeah, keep an eye on your inbox, because we should be able to send the follow-up later today or the latest tomorrow morning, I think. Cool. Cool. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, hope to see you next time. Or definitely. Thanks. You around in Mural. Thank you, everyone, for staying after. It was wonderful having you here. And, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Cool. Nasty raising a hand. Okay. Cool. Bye, everybody. See you. Bye-bye. Have a good afternoon.